Can't hurt me. Meet the world's most determined man. So many of us struggle with even the most basic fitness regimen. Somehow we always find an excuse not to head to the gym after work or to skip that weekend run. But what would it be like to live your life with no excuses for not giving 100%? Because that's exactly how the author, David Goggins, lives. Can't Hurt Me is about how David Goggins transformed himself into one of America's fittest athletes through self-discipline, mental toughness, and hard work. We'll go on a journey and discover this incredible man's extraordinary life story. From his traumatic childhood and overweight 20s to his amazing transformation into one of the world's fittest soldiers, we'll learn what it takes to become one of the fittest people on the planet. Through searing honesty and unbelievable anecdotes, we'll find out just how Goggins turned his life around to achieve the near impossible, and how you can emulate his success. Read on to discover how Goggins' childhood shaped him, why he almost dropped out of the military altogether, and what awaits you in Badwater 135. David Goggins' early life was blighted by his violent, demanding father. Almost every night of the week, Goggins' father took his wife and kids out to his skating rink, where he made them work tirelessly until midnight. Between the ages of 6 and 8, David's job was to look after the skating shoes. His mother would cook their dinner over a hot plate in the rink's office, and after the children had finally finished work at around midnight, she would put them to bed in the office too. Unfortunately, the thumping music from the dance floor made sleep almost impossible, and Goggins regularly fell asleep in school, unable to concentrate on his lessons. While this grueling routine of school and late-night work would have been intolerable for any young child, the sickening brutality of Goggins' father made life all but unbearable. David often witnessed his father beating his mother with a belt when she dared to disobey him. Once, when David contracted a bad ear infection, she dared to take him to the hospital. Toughness hated spending money on his family, even when his children's health was at risk. When his mother returned from the hospital, Toughness beat her senseless. Whenever David tried to intervene to protect his mother, he was belted too. He often had to hide the bruises and angry red welts his father's belt had given him. Thankfully, when David was 8 years old, he and his mother escaped from their tormentor. His mother sweet-talked his father into letting her get a credit card in her name, and with the help of a sympathetic neighbor, she planned her escape. After hurriedly leaving Toughness's house, David and his mother drove to the small town of Brazil, Indiana, where they started a new life free from Toughness. But their newfound freedom was bittersweet. Why? Because David's older brother decided to stay with their father, despite his cruelty, meaning that David saw him little after they left. Unfortunately, David's life in Indiana wouldn't be free from hardship either. Goggins escaped his father, but couldn't outrun his past suffering at his hands. David Goggins may have escaped his abusive father, but that didn't mean the rest of his childhood was any easier. In small-town Indiana, he would spend the rest of his formative years grappling with poverty and the demons of his past. As soon as the initial euphoria of fleeing from Toughness wore off, David and his mother had a new and harsh reality to face: they were suddenly dirt poor. Toughness refused to give his wife and child more than a pittance to support themselves in their new life. David and his mother lived in a public housing block where they paid $7 a month in rent and eked out an existence on her part-time job and a $123 monthly welfare check. As if poverty wasn't challenging enough, the traumatic effects of David's early years began to make themselves known when he was in the 3rd grade. After years of suffering at the hands of his father, David developed a nervous stutter, his hair started to fall out, and patches of his skin lost pigment and turned a different color. Why did this happen? As an adult, David realized that he was suffering from toxic stress. This is a phenomenon in which young children who have undergone severe abuse experience long-term changes to their brain chemistry, resulting in a permanent state of fight or flight. In other words, David had been through so much that his brain and body were now permanently on high alert for danger. As David soon found out, a devastating side effect of toxic stress is its limiting effect on children's memories. When suffering from this condition, even the most gifted child will struggle to remember the things they've previously learned in school. In David's case, this meant that he was labeled as stupid by some of his teachers. Already the only black kid in his class, he now faced being yelled at and ridiculed on a daily basis. Faced with the prospect of being kicked out of school altogether and placed in a special needs facility, David began doing the only thing he could think of to get by. He started cheating on his homework and on important standardized tests. The result? His oblivious teachers allowed him to stay in school, but his education suffered terribly. Heading into his teenage years, unbeknownst to anyone else, David could barely read. Fear and disappointment held Goggins back from reaching his full potential as a young man. As a teenager, David still struggled with school and literacy. But in his late teens, he finally locked into something concrete to do with his life: join the United States Air Force. Buoyed by hopes of becoming a military man, he buckled down, learned to read and was accepted into Air Force training. Unfortunately, his path to success wouldn't be a smooth one. David's dream was to become an Air Force pararescue, a special type of soldier who specializes in parachuting into war zones and rescuing injured pilots. To complete his training, David would have to face his toughest test yet: swimming. David's mother had not been able to afford swimming lessons for him, and he was 12 years old before he even saw a pool. This meant that when he began military training, he desperately lacked the sort of swimming ability necessary for him to make the cut. Paralyzed with fear and facing increasingly tough swimming challenges, he eventually took the easy way out by quitting. When a routine medical test picked up a predisposition to sickle cell anemia, a blood disease, David used it as his excuse to walk away from the military on medical grounds. Even as he was leaving, he knew he should stay and fight through his challenges, but fear got the better of him. By 1999, with his military hopes vanquished, 24-year-old David was working a dead-end job as a night shift pest exterminator and using food to numb his disappointment. After his discharge from the Air Force, he ballooned from 255 pounds to almost 300 as his eating spiraled out of control. As soon as his pest exterminator shift ended, the first thing he did was stop off on the way home for a chocolate milkshake and a box of donuts, and that was just breakfast number one. After this, he would drive to his mother's house where she had prepared his usual morning meal. Unbelievably, this consisted of 8 cinnamon rolls, 6 eggs, 10 bacon rashers and copious amounts of sugary cereal. Sadly, David was using food to cope with the bitter realities of his life, that he was uneducated, unskilled, and heading toward a dead-end future. Luckily, the motivation he needed to turn his mediocre life around was waiting just around the corner. Goggins changed his life and his body in a quest to become a Navy SEAL. One morning, after binging on another massive breakfast, Goggins saw something on television that would change his life forever: a documentary about Navy SEALs in training.